Stan, I want to ask you, in August, you spoke to the New York Times and you said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that you're afraid of Portland leaching out in your direction, spreading out in your direction being towards Sandy. What did you mean by that?
I'm not sure if I said I or if the people in our community are
Sure.
nervous
Either way.
about it, right? I think it was more of talking about just an overall fear. Got to remember at the time of that interview, I think we were right around the 100 days straight of protests and to the commissioner's point earlier, much of it very peaceful, absolutely. In fact, I supported people in our community shortly after the tragic killing of George Floyd. Wanted to stand up in a peaceful protest and action to say enough is enough. This is not what we're about. But obviously, there was a lot of violence and vandalism that happened in Portland over the course of 100 days. We saw statues being torn down and burned and all kinds of things. We just had to turn on the local news to see that. And so, yeah, certainly, people in our community on the outskirts of that were and are, and I as mayor would be nervous about that reaching out to our community, and because in Sandy, and I would say in a lot of places outside the Portland metro area, that's not what we're all about. We stand in solidarity with our local police departments that work so hard and overtime to keep us safe. And we certainly don't want to see our local small businesses being destroyed with vandalism. And that's not what we're all about. And quite honestly, it's not what Portland used to be all about. And I would still say, for the most part, isn't about. Unfortunately, we have allowed a certain segment of our community to do these destructive acts. And we, on both sides of the aisle, we should all be standing up against that.
So, I think we're probably not going to agree on the characterization of what happened and is happening in Portland. And I'll just repeat again, the notion that the entire city of Portland was under siege is one that was
I didn't say that.
National media.
Sorry. But if we're going to do the words and mouth thing, I never said they're under siege.
No, you didn't. But the picture of Portland in general, as and I'm going to use my own words to characterize what I heard you say. The picture of Portland, the entire city of Portland, as a hotbed of violence and vandalism just doesn't reflect the reality of what has happened here over the past many months. And I will say that, I am, and I appreciate your kind of reflecting this to a certain extent, I am incredibly proud of the way that Portlanders stood up and stood out and spoke out about the murder of George Floyd and about racism and about Black Lives Matter, and really for 100 days put themselves on the line, stood out, went to the Justice Center, took on tear gas, took on batons, so if we're going to talk about calling out violence, I have said loud and clear that we have also needed to call out police violence. And so I am proud of Portlanders who acted on their values. And I would think communities would want to do the same in terms of really speaking out for those values of anti-racism.
Yeah, I mean, just again, I gotta say, I think a lot of the violence and destruction that we saw coming out of the city of Portland was quite embarrassing for most of us in the state. I mean, we certainly stand with the peaceful protesters that think that the outrageous murder of George Floyd is something that we need to stand up and speak out against. But we saw a ton of destruction. A lot of these small businesses along the main streets of Portland, they weren't closed because of COVID. A lot of them were closed because of the violence going on in Portland. And I continue to hear, of wanting to come down on, what happened in DC and the right-wing protests and movements and things like that, while, just turning a blind eye pretty much to, the destruction and violence that happened in Portland as part of these protests. And I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I really do. I think we can say how proud we are of people that engage in our civic process, in the correct manner and do it peacefully, while at the same time, expressing our outrage to those that take it to another level of violence and everything else that we see. And we should be able to do that for movements on the right and the left.
Yeah, and I think I've agreed with that, and I'm not sure who you feel has turned a blind eye. I think many of us locally have spoken up about violence, and we've been clear about what we're talking about. Are we talking about where violence is coming from? So I think we're getting into a cul-de-sac here because we have fundamentally different views of what happened.
Let me just,
including things like why storefronts are boarded up. Storefronts were boarded up because of the pandemic for a long time, and yes, to some extent because of property destruction, but they were boarded up well before that.
Well,
So
let me ask this real quick though. I'm guessing that we would both agree that the people that stormed the Capitol should be prosecuted and put into prison. And if we agree on that, do we believe that the folks that have been found to do violence and destruction in Portland, should they be prosecuted as well?
I am going to push back real hard on the equivalence between storming the Capitol, storming the United States Capitol with weaponry, putting members of Congress in danger. I am going to push back really hard on any equivalence between that and, as distasteful as it might be, throwing a bag of urine at somebody. So I really can't even respond to that
We just
question.
talked about a shooting.
Because it's a false equivalence.
We just talked about a shooting downtown Portland from Antifa onto a member of the right. We just talked about that.
Remember the ground rules. We were going to wait till the other person was finished before we talked. I did that. I'd appreciate it if you do the same thing. I condemn a shooting, absolutely. Should that person be prosecuted? Absolutely. I don't think anything I have said here or at any other time suggests that I don't think so. But you made a direct equivalence between should we prosecute the folks who stormed the Capitol with weaponry and put members of Congress in risk of their lives, and with what we have seen in protests in Portland. So that is the equivalence that I absolutely cannot buy into by responding to it.
Okay, I just, me personally, I like to see both prosecuted and put into prison for their actions, especially if
I said the person who shot somebody in the protest, and that is, that happened. But that there's no comparison in my mind between the two.
See, Commissioner, I just want to call it out on both sides. I'm not looking to defend the
both
right or the left. I just want to call it out bad on both.
Yep, and I think both sides, you can't just because the both sidism isn't representative of what actually happened.